I'm going to talk a little bit this morning in the first presentation about the micro perspective, what we know and what we do not know about income inequality in Belgium. And what I'm going to talk about today is really team effort, is based on joint work, what we have done with the Leuven team and the Antwerp team. And Sarah is sitting really at the back, really, yeah. So she just arrived, so all the hard questions, I mean, Sarah will answer them from the back. She will shout. Okay, let me start also by saying a couple of words on why we do this project. As André very well described, for us the motivation was this graph from the OECD. As you know, I'm teaching already several years about inequality, and I show this graph in my slides. And very often then a student asks me, but professor, why is Belgium so different? And in all honesty, I did not have a good answer to that question. And that's why we started this project, at least to try to answer to our students why Belgium is not moving on that graph, whereas many other countries, many of the neighboring countries are moving. And I guess I need tone again. Yeah. Okay, and what I'm going to talk about this hour is about three products which are in progress. So don't expect from me final answers yet. I mean, I hope that final answers will come in 2 years, but I want to talk about three products which are in the pipeline. First of all, we started by reviewing the existing literature. What is it actually that we know and what we don't know about income inequality in Belgium? So that's what I'm going to talk first about. And then I'm going to talk about our, let's say, about the engine of our project to a large extent. That's the data set that we are constructing in this project that brings together data from different sources. We called it with, well, the great name, the BE-PARADIS data set. I'm going to explain to you what will be in the data set, and also for people who want to use it, how you can get access to it, what you can expect from the data set, and what you cannot expect from the data. And then I will do something which is a bit dangerous, because I was not expecting such a great turnout today. I'm going to show you very first results. Okay, very first results from this data set to just give you a hint about what we can do and what we cannot do with that data set. All right, so that's the plan for the upcoming hour. And André, you're sure that the heating is not on, huh? Because oh, okay, so this is a review, and it's a review only on income inequality. So in this review, we are not going to talk about consumption inequality. We're not going to talk about wealth inequality, although that are interesting, let's say, neighboring topics. But we decided to focus on that more narrowly defined topic of income inequality. And we're going to focus on the period, basically the period that I'm walking around on this planet. Let's say from the early 80s until as close to the current period as we can get. And our focus was on papers that are actually published, academic papers that have gone through some peer review, and then also we wanted to focus on some data sets which are easily available for people in the public, right? So for instance, the World Bank has the famous POFCAL database, from which you can, in fact, with a couple of clicks, you can retrieve a trend of the Gini coefficient for Belgium. Similar story for the OECD, Eurostat, obviously, and also LIS, which is a project that, more than a project, but it harmonizes the different income surveys for the different countries. Also there you can, with a couple of clicks, generate yourself a trend of the Belgian income inequality. So we wanted to give an overview about from these two different sources. I show you a screenshot from the paper just to show also our funders that we actually have something, or almost have something, or we have a cover. I can do this joke now that the funder is not here. So, and And what we started by, of course, finding all the different sources, looking for the different sources. And please, if you see that we are forgetting something important, tell us, right? This is an intermediate workshop. This is really the moment to help us if we are forgetting something, which obviously can and probably also will be the case. So we made our review. We had a pile of papers, and then somehow we needed to put a bit of structure in that pile of papers. And we realized that all these different papers, they are different along 4 axes, right? They take different choices along 4 different axes. And I'm first going to talk about these different axes, the different choices the papers have made, and then I'm going to show you some results about what, in fact, these papers have found. Okay? So first, how do the papers differ? And I think it is useful to distinguish 3 different income concepts. I mean, we are all surveying papers on income inequality, but income might mean something different in the different papers. In fact, it means something different in the different papers. And we distinguish between market income, taxable income, and disposable income. Now, the labels might not be the best chosen labels, but they are quite common in the literature to refer to these notions like this. So market income, intuitively speaking, that's income before the government does anything. Okay, so that's either a return to work or a return to capital. And for self-employed people, yeah, it's a total mess. It's a bit of a mixture of both. All right, so that's market income. Then taxable income, that's the income notion that is used by the fiscal authorities. Right, that's, in fact, in June, well, we are probably all doing that right now, is collecting the papers to fill in our tax declarations. That information goes to the tax authorities, and they use that to define a taxable income concept. Right? The main difference between market income and taxable income is, for instance, that professional expenses and employee social insurance contributions have been subtracted from your labor income. And then the most studied notion, I would say, is the notion of disposable income. That's the income that in the end people can spend, right? That ends in their wallet at the end of the month. That's disposable income, right? From which basically the taxes have been subtracted. So that are the 3 income notions that about which people have written. And I think it's very useful to distinguish them in future work. So first, yeah. Of course, of course. Retirement would be here. Yeah, yeah. Retirement is a replacement income. Exactly, yeah. So not included in market income, but included in the later income concepts. All right. Then, that's the first axis. Very much related, but not necessarily related to that first axis, is the second axis, and that's the axis of which unit of analysis, which is the most granular element of which you want to study inequality, right? That can be an individual, you and me, right? So, for instance, many studies who look at market income, in fact, take a perspective that they compare inequality between individuals. But this can also be a fiscal household, the people with whom you file together your tax, with whom you basically complete or fill in your tax declarations, which is not exactly the same as what is called a sociological household. These are the people who are living under the same roof, right? For instance, students who make a sizable amount of money could be a different fiscal household, even though they would be still living, or somebody young, still living with their parents. Right? So it's important to distinguish these different notions because, of course, that can have an impact on the inequality that is found. Right? So that's the second axis, the axis of the unit of analysis. And then what kind of data do we have? Right? What kind of data do we have, and what kind of data, in fact, have been used by people to answer these questions? First of all, there is, and I'm going to talk more about it when I'm showing you the results, there is macro data from the national accounts. So that can be used to say something on a more aggregate level about how the market income is divided over the different categories income from labor and income from capital, right? And then the other studies look at a more, let's say, micro level. You have surveys, which are obtained by interviewing people, right? We have the structures of earnings survey, which in Dutch is the loonenquête, done by Stadbel. That's a quite peculiar survey because it's a survey of companies of more than 10 people, but they also include some information on the earnings of these employees. So this is earnings of employees of companies with more than 10 people, right? Then we have fiscal data. The IPCAL data is in fact a data set, and I saw that there is experts here, so it feels a little bit like an exam, explaining that in front of the real experts who sit in the room. But there is fiscal data that basically collects all the fiscal declarations of all people, right? In one data set. In Belgium, that's called the IPCAL data set. And then we have income surveys. Household income surveys, we have the SEP, the socioeconomic panel, right? In the earlier years, I'm going to show you later, but that's the late 80s and the early 90s. The ECHP, the European Community Household Panel, in the period, let's say, the late 90s, early 2000s. And then since 2004, we have the SILC, the Survey on Incomes and Living Conditions, which is the data set that is used in all the European countries and is very much harmonized across the different countries. And that's collected by Eurostat. Well, it's collected by our Statistical Institute, but then goes to Eurostat. Okay, so that are the different data sources. Yes?
Small question out of curiosity. So in my IPCAL data, it's both my market, my taxable income. And you said the difference is your wage minus your expenses.
Yes.
So can we not use IPCAL data?
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the purposes of our review is to identify the gaps. This is not what can be done, this is what people have been doing. To the best of my knowledge, but I can be wrong, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has done that, what you suggest to do. Or for instance, you could use SILC to say something about market income. And that would be very interesting because then you use the same, at least the same data to say something about the different income concepts. Mm-hmm.
But many people also talk about words, so not enough jobs are created. It says allow us to have an idea on the labor cost. It's a firm report and it's not repeated.
We certainly know, but I don't know. I think that Jonas might know. I don't see where Jonas is, but I don't want to. He also is. I think the answer is probably yes, but as you said, I have never worked myself with the microdata, and that's what I would first like to have done before I answer a question on the spot. So probably the answer is probably yes, but I'm not sure the answer is really yes.
Can I add something?
Yes, sure.
So, but it's only for 1 year, but there has been by Stadbel made a link exactly between SILC and the IPCAL data and the administrative data, and I also used feed in SILC basically since 2020. But that's not a systematic study about inequality based on market income.
So one of the advantages of standing here is that there is a bottle of water. I hope it was meant for me. Yes, thanks, André. Okay, so that are the way I've already talked about 3 different axes, right? The income concept, the unit of analysis, the underlying data that is being used, and then also, of course, what is the kind of measure that is used to quantify inequality. Most studies refer to the Gini coefficient. André also used, for instance, a graph referring to the Gini coefficient, which is a summary measure, which summarizes the entire distribution. But there's also, in fact, quite some work, or a lot of work, that uses interdecile ratios. What's the ratio between, for instance, the income of somebody at the 9th decile divided by somebody at the 1st decile? Okay? So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about interdecile ratios. And then another way of looking at inequality, and that has become very, very popular, let's say, after the work of Thomas Piketty, is to look at income shares. What's the share of, for instance, the top 1% in total income? Okay, so again, we distinguish these three different ways of looking at inequality. Okay, so typically the studies that we have found take a decision on each of these four choices, right? And that's what I'm going to talk about right now, and I will follow basically the structure that is provided by looking at the different income concepts. So first I'm going to talk about what we know about market income, then what we know about taxable income, and then what we know about disposable income. About market income, I can be very short. We know very little about market income in Belgium. What we do know, however, it's a graph made by André based on data from the national accounts, from the National Bank. This is the weight, the labor share. In total income, how much of total income goes in fact to the reward of labor rather than the reward for capital, right? And this is, you see the trend for the US, that's the black line, which basically is a steady decline of the labor share, right? Blue line, EU 15, is quite similar, whereas for Belgium we see a rather different trend, right? We see a trend which is declining, yes, if you start at 1980, since I have been walking around, slightly declining, but there's a sharp increase in the period which precedes basically the 1980s, in the 70s, right? So do we see this, let's say, sharp decline of the labor share in Belgium? Well, it depends where you start looking, basically, would be our answer. This is aggregate data. This is macro data. This doesn't tell us anything about the distribution of incomes from labor, neither about the distribution of incomes from capital. And in fact, there is not that much of work in Belgium, which we regret. There's not that much work in Belgium about the distribution of earnings or the distribution of income from capital. There's a little bit, and that is provided by the OECD in their employment and labor statistics database, and that is based on this survey that we just have talked about, Bram. These are interdecile ratios, right? A few clicks, right? If you don't trust me, tonight, a few clicks and you're on the OECD website and you can generate this graph. Not as nice as this one, because this one is made by Toon. Toon is sitting there. And what we see, it's all in the eye of the beholder, of course, but we see a rather stable trend in the interdecile ratio of the earnings. Remember, individual perspective only in firms with more than 10 employees. So this doesn't tell us anything about retired people or about people in unemployment or people in small firms. Right? Stable, we see here a little spike. I have no idea, in all honesty, whether that spike is still in more recent data there, but this suggests at least that while the P10 and the P90, so the 90th, sorry, the 9th decile and the 10th decile remain stable, the median, the P50 or the 5th decile has moved a little bit upwards. Okay. Interdecile ratios. An interesting graph, which is basically the next graph in the database, which was one that I was quite surprised of when I saw it the first time, and I don't know whether many people know it. This is the gender wage gap based on the same data. So how is it computed? You take a full-time employee, a male full-time employee, a female full-time employee at a certain point in the distribution, for instance, at the median, right? That's the orange curve. You take the difference between these two people at that point in the distribution, and you divide that by the male full-time earners. So the closer they are together, the smaller this number. So this is a measure of the gender wage gap at different points in the distribution, and you see that both at the top, the high earners, the low earners, and the median, we see a steady decline over time of this gender wage gap in Belgium, right? That's basically what we found, and again, if there is more that we have missed, come to us, come to me in the break and tell me. I mean, that's why we have this intermediate workshop, but that's basically the story, that the pieces of the puzzle that we have found for market income in Belgium. Let's now move to taxable income. Taxable income, there's work by André, there is work, this is the IPCAL data that I refer to, and there's also work by Christian. Where is Christian? Christian is there. There's, by the way, a very nice review paper by Christian, which was one of the papers that we used a lot to get inspired by, published in 2017, which also has graphs, similar graphs. So this is interdecile ratios based on taxable income, and there is something that you should know about taxable income. So taxable income are always presented, I think, in the debate as, that's the holy grail. Imagine that we were Norway or Sweden, we would have taxable, I mean, we would have data, we would have fiscal data, we would have data for all people. That would be fantastic. For Belgium, however, it's not so great, and that's because before 2000, not everybody was actually in the data set. In fact, people with a very low income were not in the fiscal databases. That means that comparing this, doing what we have done on this, in this graph, comparing what happens before 2000 and after 2000 makes hardly any sense. Right? It's because you don't have the low incomes before the 2000s in your database. So I would be very, very careful and very warn you against making, let's say, time trends, making analysis of the long-term trend in taxable income based on the IPCAL data. What is in the IPCAL data is what people have declared. If you have a separate company and you declare the incomes from that separate company, the incomes that you have to declare, but no, if the company is a separate company, it would not be in the IPCAL data. So there's only what you have. So it's really the data set only contains what you, it's a data set that contains all the little boxes that you or Michelle completes in June when filling your tax declaration.
So the earnings that you pay yourself out of the income
Yeah.
are, of course, in the first one.
Yeah.
Then they are in the data.
But the fact that you, yeah, if you have a company with an apartment in Knokke and the apartment in Knokke has increased in price, that is probably not in the. Okay, so be careful in comparing this story with that story. André and co-authors have tried to correct for that item non-inclusion, as it is. Yes, item non-inclusion, as it is technically called, and that brings us to the blue curves. This is curves not for the interdecile ratios, but for income shares. Piketty's favorite measure to look at the top of the distribution. That's this top 1%. And there was a very influential paper, that's the paper by Tony Atkinson and Thomas Piketty, on the top 1% in the United States, which was rapidly increasing, which then led to the Occupy Wall Street movement, people saying, we are the 99%, we are not the people who see their top 1% increasing so rapidly. And that's a bit the context, the story, why this top 1% is such an, let's say, important measure in the public debate. But for Belgium, again, caveat applies, you should not do what I do now, but it is a flat line, right? Except if you correct for this item non-inclusion, it, well, remains a rather flat line. It's in the eye of the beholder how flat the line is, of course, but and that's, in a nutshell, the story for taxable income. All right? Let's move now to disposable income. Disposable income, as I have already said, is based on 3 different data sets. Right? And I have highlighted them in green, in orange, and blue. And you notice that I hesitated because I chose colors that I'm a bit colorblind and I don't see very well the difference between these two colors. So that was a very bad choice. What is important to realize, the ones with the little circles, or the one in green, yes, that's based on SEP. This is based on the ECHP. This, for the people who know a little bit, this is the PSBH, then harmonized by Eurostat, right? In a slightly black boxish procedure, the data from the PSBH have been harmonized. That's basically this trend. That's what you see with the squares. And then silk is this diamond, the trend with the diamonds. Again, this is not our computations. These are other papers. This is all work that others have done. We have done nothing new so far. What's the problem when you look at the data set, or what is the nice thing about Belgium is that in 97, there was both a data being collected by SEP and by ACHP about the same thing, about disposable income. And look, it's a very different story, right? Is the Gini coefficient something around 0.24, or is it something around 0.28? If you interpret Gini's, I think it was Tony Atkinson who said, if it is about 3 points difference, that is economically significant. Okay? It's not about statistical significance, but it's about something real in society. Now what? Huh? What do we make from this graph? And this is something which basically has occupied colleagues of ours already. I see Karel, also Karel sitting in the room, has occupied many colleagues of us already a long period to say something about the long-term evolution in Belgium. Is the story? Yeah, the SEP. Maybe they missed some incomes in their income concept. So it could be a story that, in fact, the SEP is underestimating the incomes, and in fact, this trend should be more up. It should be somewhere there, and then Belgium has a decreasing inequality measured in disposable income over time. That's one possibility. You see me coming? It could also be the other way around. It could also be to say, no, the ECHP, that's a data set, that's the PSBH, and the PSBH is not really made to measure incomes. Yeah, they have an income module, but it's a data set that is much broader. So you could say, no, let's correct the ECHP. Let's put that a bit down and put it there, and then you have an increasing inequality in disposable income. The position we are inclined to take in this project is to really keep them as separate pieces of slightly different puzzles, right? It's not to try to do any of these operations to harmonize across the different data sets and to keep them as different data sets. With this slightly annoying consequence that for 97, yeah, we have two pieces of information which are not exactly telling us the same story about the level of inequality. So wrapping up, so a couple of weeks ago when I was trying, yes, question. The answer is yes, a lot, in fact, too much. There's many things which are different, right? So, and I think so the lesson I have learned from colleagues who have spent already a lot of time studying this, there's many things which are different. And it's very hard to pinpoint, it's because the sampling frame is different. Or it is because the income concept is different. Or it is because the time span, the income, the reference period is different. Because all these things are different, right? So it's very hard to say how to do the harmonization. You can do that, right? You can be a bit bolder than we are and to say, no, Koen, sorry, this is the story. Or, Koen, that's the story. But that's not the position we take. I think we don't have enough evidence to take such a bold position. So, wrapping up our review, and I hope that I'm doing quite well with time, wrapping up our review, when I was starting to make a first draft of the conclusion, I have two young kids, right? and they like to play a lot with the puzzles. And when I was doing that, yeah, they made a pile of all pieces of puzzles, and they basically have thrown all the puzzles on one pile, right? So you know what you have to do then. You have to put all the pieces in the different, and it gave me exactly, that was the feeling that I was also doing with this conclusion. What we have for Belgium, in all honesty, is we have little pieces of different puzzles which are on one pile, and many pieces are missing, right? So to give like a one conclusion, I don't dare to do that. But in all the graphs that I've shown you, I don't think I have shown you like a very strong smoking gun evidence for a sharp increase in inequality in Belgium. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I was not clear. That's the blue curve, the blue line that I've shown you. That's the work of André, to do exactly that. So in a clever way, what you do is you add the zeros, basically, or the very low incomes. Yes, but the more of these interventions you start doing, the harder it gets. Christian wants to join. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I don't think that is what André has done. In a nutshell, a lot of work remains to be done. And a lot of work that remains to be done needs a data set that is a little bit comparable. At least if you have the micro data set, you can at least make the same graphs, the same kind of use the same measures to say something about the same period. And that's why we started to construct, and that's in fact what we started to do in the Corona period in this project. So this is a bit the architecture of our work. You know we have these three the acronyms you know now. These are the three underlying micro data sources. We want to bring them into one database, and then we want to construct with that database in this project a synthetic data set of percentiles, right? That we then can give also to people who are interested in studying that. That's what we call our synthetic data set. And then we're going to do, let's say, 3 types of analysis based on our data set. A descriptive set of results, of which I'm going to show you, if time permits, a couple of first results in a couple of minutes. André's work with colleagues on the distributional national accounts, and then the counterfactual analysis that I hope will help us to understand what's the effect of different changes in society. Demographic changes, changes as Christian was alluding to, changes also in policies. Right? But where we are for the moment is basically what we have been working on mainly is doing this, is to bring these data sets into our database. And maybe I should also mention that, for instance, one of the uses we want to make of this descriptive analysis is the input for the Belgian part of the Deaton review that is done by IFS under the supervision, I should say, probably of Angus Deaton. Yep. So in our data set there will be individuals. So basically we include all the individuals from the underlying microdata. We, and I say we, but that's mainly the work of Sarah and Toon, we harmonize socio-demographic and income variables as much as possible. We construct some additional variables that we think are useful for users. And our idea is not only to provide the data set, or maybe not to provide a data set, because the problem is that the user will have to have access to these underlying data sets, which we cannot check. So what we are actually going to deliver at the end of this project is a stata code, which once you have the underlying microdata, gives you our BE-PARADIS data set, right? This synthetic data set, we believe that we can make that also available to users. And then there will be an extensive technical note. Again, the cover is existing, right? And there's also a long note behind that is existing, a technical note that describes what we have done, all the steps we have taken in the construction of our BE-PARADIS dataset. And also something to which we have spent quite some time is to do the external validation. To what extent is what we see in the dataset also what we find, for instance, in macro data? And now I have 5 minutes. Oh, no more. Okay. First findings. First findings. So what we have done is now we can do many things with that data set. And we haven't done many things, but what we have done is we have looked at disposable income for sociological households using the so-called modified OECD equivalence scale to make households comparable of different sizes. Yeah, Bram is not raising questions. That's good when you say equivalence scale. That means he was doing something else. And then as data sources, we're going to use the 3 underlying micro data sets. And now the cool thing is, at least what we can do is we can construct consistent inequality measures over time. I'm going to show you a lot of results. I'm going to rush through some, but maybe you like them. I like them, so I'm going to show them anyway. That's another advantage of standing here. This is a pens parade. You probably all know a pens parade. It's the thought experiment. You sit in front of your house. It takes 1 hour. This is minutes, right? These are percentiles, right? And people will pass by, and people pass by first the poorest person, and then the second poorest, and so on, until at the end the richest person passes by. And in the idea of the pens parade, the incomes are normalized such that the the average person has an income level, and in Penn's original thought experiment, it was the average length of a person, 1.8, let's say 1.8 centimeters. I just normalized here to 1, so this is always income divided by the mean income. This will be the same for all data sets. This only gives us information about the distribution, right? Not about the levels. I'm also going to show you Lorentz curves, if you like that. More or less the same type of information, but Poor people there, rich people there, that's the cumulative share they have in total in income. And I'm also, if you like that more, I'm also going to show you some summary statistics. Gini coefficient and decile ratios. This is the SEP, 88. Be very careful. Almost nothing has changed, but we now have moved to 92. 97 slight change, but the overall story is in SEP. There is not that much that is moving. I can do it once more. And so you see the Gini slightly increasing. You see the distribution slightly changing. Now be careful. If we now move to the ECHP data, which are in different color, to illustrate that I don't think that you should compare them over time, right? So we see that the shape of the distribution is quite different. Also the Lorentz curve, if you see, is on a different place. We can allow time to progress. 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001. And then we enter 3 years of nothing, and then we enter the silk years, right? Again, it's quite a different shape of distribution, which tells us something about the structural breaks that there are between the different data sets. Now, silk 2004, maybe we should take that with a pinch of salt. It was also the first silk collection, so maybe some things could have or have been improved. 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I didn't expect it to be so hot when I made this slide, so 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And now there is something that we should keep in mind. When you move to 19, also the silk has changed. The method of collecting the income data in silk has changed in the more recent years, because some of the incomes are already pre-included in the interview. In fact, if you now complete your tax declaration, in fact, the tax authorities know already some of the fields that you have to complete, right? There is already some numbers pre-filled. This information is also used by the interviewers of silk, okay? Which, of course, could have an effect on what are the incomes that are reported. And that's something which has been done since the more recent waves of silk 2019. So if I would be really, really very, let's say, dogmatic, maybe I should also use a different color for the more recent silk years. And probably that is what you wanted to see, right? Because all my nice graphs, I made them more for myself probably than they were very useful. This is what in our BE-PARADIS data, how the Gini coefficient looks like, which not surprising, looks very similar to the story about disposable income that I told you when I was discussing the review results. If you want to know, the Eurostat figures look quite similar. OECD figures look slightly different, but they use a different equivalence scale. So that might be one of the reasons why the OECD figures are slightly deviating in the more recent silk years. And that's my final slide, and then I take the bottle of water and sit down. On the short term, what do we want to do? Of course, we want to extend the data set. There is new waves. We also want to include the 85 earlier SEP wave. We want to do a deeper analysis. I've shown you some graphs, but we can do now much more deeper analysis. We can look at absolute inequality measures, something that Andre and I, you might know, are very keen on doing. So that's one of the things we certainly want to do. We can look at something like called like a growth incidence curve and so on and so forth. It would be nice also to, and now I go a bit against time in this workshop, we could also try to include some of the insights of the distributional national accounts in our analysis. That's what André is going to talk about in a minute. And then, once we have done that, so that's basically, let's say, on the short term, then on the slightly longer term, now once we have the data set, now we can start playing with the data set. And we can try to simulate some of the events that we have seen in society. Let me just give one example. What we could do, for instance, is study the effect of the fact that there are more singles in our society. What we can do, we can say, well, let's reweight the number of singles that we observe in the different data sets and see what the effect is on the income distribution. Or we can also generate counterfactuals with respect to policy. What if the taxation scheme had not changed, or what if it had changed in a different way? Would have been the effect on disposable income? And of course, we can also include, and that comes a bit back to Bram's first question, we can also now look at other income concepts with the same data. In a consistent way, we can look at market income, taxable income, and so on. So that's our counterfactual analysis. And then I now happily answer some questions if there are, and pass the floor to André for the DINA analysis.
So to come back to today's presentation, your first slide, confirm created your data. Inequality did not increase.
I think Bram, that you were. I hope that was not what I said, because I tried not to say exactly that. What I wanted to say is that is what we see. And now we don't have, being slightly bolder, I don't think that we have really good, an answer to the question or really good evidence to say that inequality increases like it does in the US or other countries, which are, I think, also dominating the public debate here in Belgium.
That's why I was asking. So,
Yes, please.
So this is surveys and disposable. It's only survey.
Wait. No, it should, please. I think, and I look at Toon and or Sarah, not yet, in fact. Do we have much information on this secondary pillar income? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's a very good advice, but that's also how the data set is more or less structured, is that indeed that users can give, because we provide the data code and we try to build the data code in such a way that this kind of operations can be done in an easy and a straightforward way, without having to go into the manual code at a very low level to see, to include this or that. Karel, I also think that you had a question. Karel, you're absolutely, I thank you for your comment. So this scale goes to 5, but for many of the years in the ACHP, in fact, the number goes to 7 or so. I just capped them, and that's exactly illustrating the point, your point. Mhm. That's an excellent point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks, Karel. I move, and then I move to Christian. Yeah, please. I have been learned to distinguish between good questions and excellent questions. And excellent questions are questions to which you have an answer in the later part of the workshop. This is an excellent question. Exactly, because the ULB presentation will be exactly about that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Question. Let yeah. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. Can imagine.